Welcome back to Generals and Napoleon, episode 56, General Duroc, Napoleon's Jack of all trades. We have a very, very, very special guest on the phone once again, my good friend Irene Kim. Say hello, Irene.
Hi there.
If you don't remember Irene, she did a fabulous episode a few episodes ago on Caulaincourt. And I thought it'd be interesting to discuss another general who, in many respects, was very similar to Caulaincourt and Duroc, correct?
Similar but different in details. That's I think where we'll get really interested in.
Yeah, indeed. And, long service to Napoleon, very supportive of Napoleon throughout his career.
Mm-hmm.
And just an interesting guy. Unfortunately, he met with an untimely death, right?
Right.
Yeah.
At the most unexpected time of his career. Mm-hmm. Very
Yeah. It was tragic. But let's jump in. I'll give you the honor if you'd like to pronounce his name in French for me, his full name.
Well, I have been studying French, but obviously, I'm not to be relied on too much. But he was, born Gerard Christophe Michel du Roc on 25 October 1772 in Pont-à-Mousson, Nancy district, in northeastern France, in the former Duchy of Lorraine.
Right, and I think you did pretty good there with that pronunciation. Very nice. Very nice. And he was from a noblesse des robes family. Can you explain that one more time for us?
Oh, that's right. So the French nobility could be categorized into two main tiers. The tier one being the noblesse d'épée, meaning the nobles of the sword, and they were usually very antiquated families, like dating back to as early as the times of the Crusade, and they earned their title by merit, which meant military service under the king.
Mm-hmm.
And the tier two, the noblesse de la robe, which literally means nobles of the robe, they meant nobles who acquire their titles through other means. And they often, try to elevate their status by intermarrying with the poor people of the noblesse de l'épée. And the percentage breakdown was about 70 to 30%, 30 to 70% between the noblesse de la l'épée and noblesse de la robe. And the percentage of the second category grew proportionally larger at the, towards the eve of the French Revolution.
And his father was a captain of dragoons in the Royal Army. Did he have a privileged upbringing, or how was his early life?
Okay, it's quite complicated because first of all, his father had all of his children quite, late in his life.
Mm-hmm.
So as you said, his father, Claude Sidonie Michel du Roc, was born in 1720, and like you said, he served as the first captain of the, first captain of a squadron of dragoons during the 7 Years' War. And he was also dubbed the Knight of St. Louis for his service during the 7 Years' War in 1753. And he had a total of 34 years of military service from 1734 to 1767. But in the middle of his service, he felt like his hearing loss problems were becoming worsened every day. So he suddenly announced his retirement. But he made a critical mistake here. He asked for nothing more than his military pension from the king. And this had the consequence of sinking his future family into poverty, unbefitting of his lineage and status. So after his retirement, he moved to Pont-à-Mousson in the Lorraine region, where he met a widow named Anne Dauphine Papigny. Claude Sidonie, the father Duroc, meets her at her town Mirecourt, and the marriage was consummated there. And the couple went to live in Pont-à-Mousson, where Claude would live until his death in 1809. And the couple had 4 children. The first, Pierre, born in 1769, who became a priest. The first daughter, born in 1770, who became a nun, like her older brother. And then the third son was Gerard Christophe, born in 1773, the only one of his sons who would follow his profession and become the most renowned among them.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Well, I think that's where it gets interesting because young Duroc enters military school in 1781,
Hmm.
and he emerges 8 years later as the second lieutenant of artillery.
Right.
But in 1792, he opposes the new revolutionary government and becomes a counter-revolutionary soldier in the Condé army, which is like
Hmm.
a royalist army, correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So it's a particularly dangerous time to be a noble in France. With the overthrow of the king and nobles being put to the guillotine, I mean, what were the options for the nobility? I mean, you could either leave the country, you could
Hmm.
join the counter-revolutionaries, or submit to the new government and hope they don't guillotine you. Is that pretty much your options?
Yeah, that's pretty much correct, I think. And plus, there were gray areas like what Duroc chose to do. First enroll after his school in the army of the Conde, and then to feel extremely disillusioned about how disorderly they looked. Or to borrow the words of his friend Marmon, he thought Duroc's natural good sense soon made him comprehend the confusion prevailing among the emigres. So
Mhm.
he returned to France and came to Metz, where Marmont was then in garrison. And then he told Marmont, who was also his classmate alongside General Foy, what had
Mhm.
happened to him and his resolution to re enter the service of the new France.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, after the successful Battle of Valmy under future Marshal Kellerman,
Hmm.
the new revolutionary government becomes more stable. Duroc changes his mind and leaves the royalists. And in
Yeah.
1793, he joins the Revolutionary Army, works his way up to captain. Do we know how he met Napoleon? I know you mentioned Marmont there. Do you know?
Mhm.
I know he's made aide de camp to Napoleon. Do you know how they met?
Oh, yes. It's from the 1st of June, 1793, when, he is appointed the second lieutenant of the 4th Regiment in the Martin's Horse Artillery Company. He partook in the captures of Avignon, Marseille, and then Toulon, where he first met Napoleon, then an obscure artillery officer from Corsica who came to
Right.
replace his wounded commander, de Martin.
Right.
Hmm.
Very interesting, though, that he meets Napoleon very early on, and then realizes like, hey, I want to devote my life to this up and coming officer, this Napoleon guy. He distinguishes himself in several battles in Napoleon's famous Italian campaign. Can you speak to his level of devotion to Napoleon? Was it immediate, or did he kind of grow to kind of blindly follow Napoleon like Marshal Bessier or Junot?
I believe that he certainly fell to Napoleon's charms like much earlier because it's in the middle of the siege of Toulon that he got promoted again to promoted again, and then in his campaign of Italy, before or after the Battle of Arcole, he becomes appointed as one of the 8 AD camps of Napoleon based on his merit and courage. So
Hmm.
here's a two contested accounts of how he came to be appointed the new ADC. So after Arcole, many of Napoleon's aide-de-camps had either died or become wounded. So Napoleon decided that he needed new ones. And back then, Duroc was the ADC to General Lespinasse, who was commander of the artillery of the Army of Italy. And Lespinasse argued that Napoleon demanded him to give him one of his ADCs, and he, generously offered Napoleon Duroc, saying, "It's the best present I can give you." But Marmont kind of says the opposite. That it's after the Battle of Arcole, between 15th to 17th November 1796, that Napoleon personally consulted Marmont on replacing the ADCs lost.
Mm.
And Marmont says he proposed Duroc, who ended up being selected. Such was the origin of his future. Duroc constantly remembered it and even felt a sincere friendship for me, which time only strengthened. So Duroc became the third of the 8 new ADCs to Napoleon, who, if you don't mind, I can describe phrase by phrase. Can,
Sure.
can I?
Yeah.
Okay. The first was Junot, admired for his instance of intrepidity at the siege of Toulon, as well as his clear and neat handwriting. The second, Marmont, then a colonel of artillery with this unbound passion for glory and ambition. The third was Duroc. Now, here's the interesting bit. Count Lavalette acknowledges that he was less brilliant than the two former, but possessed a greater solidity of judgment and a remarkable tenaciousness of character, and he was always very grateful as well. Like just like his father, who retired without asking anything more from the king, Duroc just took his duty of being loyal to Napoleon for granted, and that's what astonished most of people during this phase. And the remaining four were the 17-year-old Lemarroy, covered with wounds, and Sulkowski, the polyglot Polish emigre who had fled after the siege of Warsaw, and
Mm-hmm.
who later became appointed to the emissary to Constantinople.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was 16-year-old Louis Bonaparte. And
Mm.
lastly, there was Crossier, a brave and clever officer of cavalry. And basically, Duroc, from this appointment, would follow his general everywhere and even fought with great bravery. One of the two of the most distinguishing incidents being that at Primolano, 7 September 1796, where he had a horse killed right under him,
Mm-hmm.
and 19th March 1796, when he led the passage of Isonzo, after which Napoleon wrote to the Directory in praise of him. Citizen Duroc, my ADC and captain, behaved with the bravery that characterizes the staff of the army of Italy. So such was, the descriptions of his career during his Italian expedition.
Yeah, and it must have been hard to shine. I mean, you mentioned a lot of aide-de-camps there who Napoleon was very fond of. Junot, Marmont, his brother Louis, obviously.
Yeah.
So for Duroc to kind of stand out from that pack, I think is very interesting.
Yeah, and especially given that he wasn't particularly known for his military talents, it's remarkable like how much the extent of devotion alone can attract the attention of your superior, I'd say.
Well, you also mentioned his astute judgment, Duroc's judgment, and I know
Yeah.
later in the career of Napoleon, he would often, if he needed counselor or good judgment, he would seek Duroc. Don't correct?
Yes, like from just distributing orders to delivering the most sensitive issues, Napoleon always consulted Duroc.
Hmm. Well, moving on in our story, um, he accompanies Napoleon on the Egyptian campaign and is wounded at Abu Qir,
Hmm.
and he's one of the chosen few who gets to leave Egypt with Napoleon in 1799, and he assists his coup for power. So yeah, he must have been amongst the very few that Napoleon really wanted at his side during this critical time.
Definitely. I mean, when you look at like his performance during the Egyptian expedition, he really tried to consolidate the morale of the soldiers, which was like toppling apart by the time of the siege of Jaffa. So,
Yeah.
for instance, he saw his grenadiers fall and becoming utterly demoralized, and then he rushes at their head and struggles hand to hand against several Turks. The
Hmm.
army sees him disappear in a fiercely defended citadel and believes him to be lost. But soon he reappears on the platform, master of the tower and rampart, which
Mm.
earns the praise of his grenadiers. Then he was wounded twice, actually. First during the siege of St. John d'Acre on 8th May, when the French tried to launch a counteroffensive without enough support. Duroc, according to Bourrienne, who was like his best friend during this time and Napoleon's secretary, he
Hmm.
was in his trench and was wounded in his right thigh by the bursting of a howitzer fired against the fortifications. But it accidentally, he was lucky that it only caused a minor laceration on his thigh without touching his bone that much. And then,
Right. And he's unquestionably brave, but I don't think he gets enough credit. He was a pretty good general, as we'd find out. Like he was pretty talented in that area.
yeah, And Napoleon
Um,
reciprocated by, naming him the premier aide-de-camp to consul on 17th October 1799,
mhm.
before, his return, just a week after his return to France.
Yeah, and I want to talk about some. Well, it's going to be a tough question, but let me just give a little backstory. In
Sure.
1800, he serves Napoleon at the Battle of Marengo. He's promoted to general of brigade and is sent on several diplomatic missions to Austria, Russia, Denmark, and Sweden.
Hmm.
He seems to me very similar to Colin Court, but what do you think their differences were? I mean, they're both generals, they both serve as diplomats, but they were sort of different, don't you think?
They were both workaholics, but yeah, there are quite subtle but you know um, very key differences between these two men.
Hmm.
First of all, I would say is the scope of their diplomacy, the scope and tenure of their diplomacy. So Duroc was sent to the Prussian court 3 to 4 times, I believe, from the time right after the Brumaire coup to the time after Napoleon's entrance to Berlin after the War of the Fourth Coalition. But he
Hmm.
was also present at the Treaty of Schönbrunn, and multiple paid multiple visits to Copenhagen, Stockholm, and even Basel, Switzerland. And he was constantly moving between one place to another. So compared to Colin Core, who spent his time in St. Petersburg from 1808 to 1810 and cultivated a very deep relationship with the Tsar, I would say his scope was broader and lighter in terms of commitments.
Right.
And yeah, another key difference would be in terms of their attitude towards Napoleon. Now, Duroc was often described as too devoted,
Hmm.
to the extent of being uncritically loyal to Napoleon, like
Hmm.
almost as if like he was more submissive than brave sometimes. So if Napoleon like gives him a very difficult errand, like for example, right after the Battle of Jena and Austerlitz, when Duroc, went to the Prussian diplomats demanding extremely punitive terms of, peacemaking, Duroc would just go forth. Whereas I believe if that was Caulaincourt, he would, ask Napoleon to amend the terms in a, more conciliatory manner, so as to avert the long-term deterioration of relationship. But
Right.
Duroc wasn't really the person to do that, and he would never criticize the emperor directly, whereas Caulaincourt often, felt free to speak up. And Baron Castellan, one of the other aides-de-camp to Napoleon, he actually made this comment before their invasion of Russia. Napoleon looks for Duroc when he wishes to hear something more comfortable, while he sees Caulaincourt's this untainted, very objective assessment of of reality whenever he needs to kind of feel tense about what's going on.
Hmm. That's an interesting point right there. Yeah, yeah. Both smart men, both came from nobility, but you're right. Maybe Duroc was more unblindly loyal than Colin Core, who gave him more of a critical opinion.
Right.
Yeah. Um, okay, well, moving along in the story, he's made Grand Marshal of the palace, where he has many duties, including the personal safety of Napoleon, both at home and on campaign, which seems to me like a difficult task. According to historian Philip Dwyer, there were 20 to 30 attempts on Napoleon's life throughout his career.
Mhm.
So that's one aspect of the job, is protecting Napoleon. What else does the Grand Marshal do?
Okay, so the scope of his job, like it's quite nebulous and almost like without like any bound. That I really admire his capacity for multitasking in this regard.
Hmm.
He was appointed the Grand Marshal of the Palace on 2nd February. On the same day, he became the Grand Officer of the Legion of Honor. And from that time, Napoleon, the Emperor, had the unlimited confidence placed on him. Basically, he would continue his diplomatic missions according to Marmont's description, always overburdened with employment and oppressed with fatigue and ennui, to such a degree that he was at times like wont to murmur against favor and greatness. And
Hmm.
inside the palace, he managed the household supplies and expenses of emperor at home and when he was on campaigns. And these included like extremely miscellaneous tasks like distributing every order for the allocation of resources across the army units,
Hmm.
telling just men on conquered territories what to do. Duroc would also supervise festivities, trying to do so without making the guests uncomfortable. For instance, at a ball in 1810, he and Napoleon hosted a ball to celebrate his victories against Austria in
Hmm.
1809.
Hmm.
And Napoleon and Duroc went similarly disguised in a plain black domino and common mask
Hmm.
to mingle freely with the crowd while not making anyone discover them. And at the same time, Duroc made sure that every exit was guarded by a battalion of sentries
Hmm.
in a very discreet manner, again, to not
Right.
to ruin the mood.
Right.
And Duroc was also tacitly responsible, I should say, for delivering every sensitive intelligence or information from Napoleon to everyone else. So one day, Napoleon joked that a hat maker named Despo was to be expelled from the palace because he was responsible for Josephine's excessive spending, I believe. But Savary took this too seriously and actually got to action. He was about to like kick her out of her carriage
Mm.
until Duroc like heard this and ordered him to stop. That the emperor was just joking.
Yeah. Yeah. It almost sounds like a Marshal Berthier type of life where you're handling very important operations like guarding the emperor and allocating money for the troops, but you're also handling like minuscule tasks like like you just gave examples to. Like it seems like a jack of all trades type of job where you have to do big things and little things all at once.
He is, and like regardless of how frivolous some of those tasks may sound, clearly like if handled wrongly, then they had the potential to escalate into something more serious. So Napoleon really had all his trust placed in Duroc in this regard. So like one night, Duroc was seen being severely reprimanded by Napoleon for neglecting to transmit an order. And Laura Junot was very surprised to hear how, apparently, frivolous this task was. It was an order regarding the regulation of private breakfasts at the palace, which he had given Duroc the evening before. And
Hmm.
the order had been delayed by just a few hours, but Napoleon insisted that an additional day's expense would be just too much for him.
Mm. That's just yeah, like you wouldn't think someone would get yelled at over like that kind of an order, but I guess in Napoleon's mind there were no big orders or small orders; they were all the same.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, Moving along, he's promoted to general of division, and a few years later, at the epic Battle of Austerlitz, he commands the famed Grenadiers of Oudinot. I think Oudinot was injured, as he always was.
Ah,
Um,
yes. So
yeah.
he had a ball through his thigh at the Battle of Hollabrunn on
Mm,
16th November. But Urino, as Urino always was, insisted on giving commands and remaining at the field until the day before the Battle of Austerlitz. And at that daybreak, Urino was still giving orders to the generals on the road to Olmütz and even tried mounting his horse. So Napoleon approached him and said, "Your courage is beyond your strength. I shall give your grenadiers to Duroc, and you can stay with me." So upon receiving the order, now we see, how discerning Duroc can be when it comes to, maintaining relationships between marshals and generals under
mhm.
Napoleon, which could sometimes like escalate into volatile competition in politics. He
Indeed.
told Oudinot humbly, "My dear general, this elite corps owes its reputation to you. It's you who will command it. As for me, I will nominally, obviously, march under your order." And this dispute spread through the camp like wildfire and raised the morale of the same grenadiers who had been sulking about the scheduled absence of his of their general.
Hmm.
And these
I love that
grenadiers,
story.
mhm,
I think that's great.
yeah,
Like they were both courteous to each other.
hmm
And as you mentioned later on, the marshals tend to bicker more often than the generals, but it just
hmm
shows that Duroc is very courteous.
it's remarkable that how he rarely got into the so-called office politics in the marshalate,
Mhm.
and these anecdotes show how Duroc managed to do that, like managed to earn the esteems of lots of people without incurring any one of them's jealousy.
Yeah, in 1806, yeah, he handles the delicate negotiations with the defeated Prussians, and again, I think he does a good job there, don't you?
Oh yes, so that was like a really how should I say really a tormentuous project he had embarked on,
Hmm.
because by that time, when Napoleon and Duroc and others entered Berlin, all the nobles had fled, and Frederick William and Queen Louise had fled towards Königsberg with the remnants of their army. And for Napoleon, it was imperative that he drags Prussia back to the orbit of the Emperor of the French against Russia, which had successfully, goaded Prussia to, join its own orbit. But
Hmm.
now that the Prussia was paying its toll by multiple defeats in every corner of its territory, Napoleon commissioned Duroc to engage in an interview with the Prussian envoy named Luchesini, who Napoleon personally very much disliked. So
Hmm.
Napoleon, purposefully sends Duroc because he knows that Duroc will confer with him in an extremely inflexible manner, no compromise.
Hmm.
Now that Prussians had given up after multiple resistance, Napoleon was bent on repaying the benefits of his victory. So
Hmm.
they engaged in multiple interviews, three times from 20th October to 26th October, when Luchesini finally returns to Frederick William's headquarters and realizes that behind this proposal by Napoleon, that a sincere desire that he has a sincere desire to reestablish the old relationship between Prussia and France, were actually a set of extremely retaliatory demands against
Hmm.
Prussia, which was like raising the remaining nobility outside Berlin to
Right.
protest against the French control. And Duroc here really influences Napoleon to show a degree of clemency, quite unlike him in the later phase of his career.
Hmm.
So that since all the nobility had fled, a provisional government was operating in Berlin under General Prince Hatzfeld.
Hmm.
Now Napoleon really scorned him. He was actually quite disgusted about him. Napoleon thought he was actively communicating with his own king on a virtual exile to foment another discord between him and the Prussians. So Napoleon one day suddenly demands that he be court-martialed, possibly to be sentenced to the most extreme measures. So
Right.
Caulaincourt, Duroc, and Berthier tries to appease the anger of Napoleon, and Rapp also joins. And together, this mini coalition of four try to persuade Napoleon against a against doing something that would incur further resentment by the conquered population.
Right.
So this compels Napoleon to visit Princess Hatzfeld's quarter, who was 8 months pregnant and was trembling at the prospect of her husband suddenly becoming killed.
Mm.
And Napoleon pays her a visit and says, "Your husband, Madame, has brought himself into an unfortunate scrape. According to our laws, he deserved to be sentenced to death. But General Rapp, give me his letter. Here, Madame, read this." After she read her husband's letter, which Napoleon had accused of for fomenting discord, he says, "Now I have no other proof against the Prince of Hatzfeld, Madame." He just throws the letter into the fireplace and declares, therefore, he's at liberty. So
Mm.
Berthier, Duroc, Caulaincourt, and Rapp really had the effect of saving the life of Prince Hatzfeld, who
That's
would later
amazing.
come back. Yeah.
Yeah. I've never heard that story. That's incredible. Yeah, he just sounds like a very astute, smart guy. Like he knows how to read a room and make the right decision.
Yep. So he really helped smoothen, soften the process of negotiation. And it was he who was present at the signing of the armistice on 16th November between himself and the Prussian envoys Zastrow and Luchesini.
That's
And
right.
Napoleon here declares the campaign against Prussia is finished
Hmm.
and realizes that he needs to continue the war on the east of this tour because the Russians would not be stopped by this peacemaking with Prussia.
Right.
So Brock also actually continues to accompany Napoleon when he, against the Prussians' will, crosses the Vistula to meet the Russians. But here, Duroc, so in the middle of his passage, he becomes seriously wounded on his left clavicle after his carriage crashes on a thawing ground,
Mm.
and he's sent to recover at a nearby village while Napoleon continued his journey eastward. This implies that the story of Duroc having delivered Napoleon's love letter to Marie Walewska while he visited Warsaw. That story could have been fabricated because Duroc did not recover for a month or two.
Right. Yeah, no, it's a lot of interesting backstory there of this campaign. But I know Napoleon was very pleased with Duroc, and in 1808 he makes him Duke of Friaul.
Yes.
Can you tell us a bit about Duroc's personal life? I know he and Napoleon's stepdaughter Hortense had an interest in each other,
Mm-hmm.
but obviously that didn't work out because Hortense was paired with Louis Napoleon, Napoleon's brother. Was Duroc
Right.
ever married? What happened with his personal life?
So speaking of his private life, it's a bit complicated. Hortense did have a liking for him, but Duroc, according to multiple sources, rarely returned her affection.
Mm.
So, but they did remain in communication before his marriage, and everyone at the Malmaison knew about the thing going on between them. And initially, Napoleon did entertain the idea of a union between his loyal subordinates and Hortense.
Mm.
So, according to Hortense's biographer named Robert Berhan, both Josephine and Napoleon, kind of monitored what was going on. Josephine tried to, frame it as a one-time thing, like considering her feelings not very deep-rooted and Duroc not worth their time. But Napoleon grew to see them more clearly over the time, and even considered raising Duroc's rank in advance to be more befitting to be that of his stepdaughter's husband.
Hmm.
But Josephine eventually became very opposed to the idea and would personally intervene on behalf of Hortense. And there is a family drama between this. Josephine could sense Napoleon growing distance from her
Mm.
and was also keen on marrying Hortense off to one of Napoleon's own kins so that she could consolidate the family tie amidst
Right.
growing
I think
strain
that's
between, yeah.
that that's a great point. Yeah, I just
Hmm.
recently did an episode on Hortense, and Beatrice Knight mentioned that was one of Josephine's ideas was to tighten or firm up the family bond between her family and Napoleon's family.
Right. So it's like a mini realpolitik in the Malmaison. And Josephine had valid reasons to, support this idea because Napoleon's brothers were also quite antagonistic towards Josephine,
Hmm.
and they began to support the marriage for a more sinister purpose. They thought the marriage could help separate Josephine from Hortense, and make the Bonapartes acquire a greater influence over the others at Malmeno.
Interesting. That's a good point. Yeah, I never
Yeah.
thought of that. Yeah.
So the question becomes, so was it a mere fling or not? Well, the secretary Bourrienne states that every morning he played billiards with Hortense, and Hortense, he gave Hortense a letter from Duroc, he says, and she would just retire to her chamber immediately, read the letters, often filled with tears of joy and emotions, and it would take it a while for her to return to the billiard room. But on 9th August 1802, Duroc ends up marrying someone else. It was
Mm-hmm.
the daughter of a wealthy Spanish court banker named Marie de Niguez Martinez de Hervas,
Mm-hmm.
born in 1788.
Mm-hmm.
And why is that? Well, I think according to both Constant, the valet of Napoleon, and Bourrienne, Duroc could have married her anytime if he wanted to. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Hortense, because Napoleon was increasingly becoming supportive of the idea.
Mm-hmm.
But Duroc was back then on the lookout for something better, with his customary prudence, and one day flatly refused the suggestions that he marry Hortense.
Mm-hmm.
I personally think this decision stemmed from his experience of poverty under his failing family, like a decade and a half ago. That he thought someone else than a family of the Bonapartes could offer him a better fortune.
Mm-hmm.
And Constant later kind of mocks him that he probably repented his rashness later on when the crowns were becoming distributed to everyone who was related to Napoleon.
Right.
But he marries this woman on August 1802, strangely, on the same day 2 years ago when Murat and Caroline got married. Okay?
Right.
And the marriage was viewed as unfavorable by many of the spectators. Now, Hortense would be, just devastated on the scene.
Yeah.
Louis Bonaparte and his bride were said to look very sad, and she openly wept bitterly during the ceremony. And
Mm-hmm.
she would continue to avoid her husband, who had grown estranged from her.
Mm-hmm.
And Josephine tried to, divert Hortense's, attention by trying to, mend the rift between the couple. But
Mm-hmm.
it wouldn't really help, and it broke the onlooker's heart to see this. And what's more was that the woman, um, Marie, the new wife of Duroc, was viewed as very uncultured. She
Mm-hmm.
was described as a little woman, very dark and very thin, who was vivacious but very ungraceful, and was fond of humor of the most acrid nature, and was seen as like very arrogant, exacting, and capricious temper. I think
Right.
she sort of had an anger management disorder because one day, yeah, she would throw tantrums at people like, someone who came to fix her piano, and even at once like threw her expensive watch just out of whim. But
Mm.
later on, the couple grew very content with each other, and her reputation was redeemed as an example of tender devotion to duty and of force of her character during all the awful misfortunes which have befallen her and her husband.
Did she and Duroc have children?
Yep, they had a son and a daughter. The son was named Napoleon Louis,
Of course.
born in 1811, and a daughter named Hortense Virginie. Now that's strange.
That
She was
is
born the
strange.
year after that. Yep.
That's very strange. I
Yep.
mean, Napoleon, everyone in France was naming their son Napoleon at the time, but to
Mhm.
name your daughter after your former girlfriend, that's interesting. Yeah.
Really speaks to how fond Napoleon was to rock. I mean,
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, moving along in the story.
okay.
Um, in 1812, Duroc accompanies Napoleon throughout the Russian invasion and suffers through the highs and mostly lows of that campaign, where
Yes.
obviously, you know, most of the army dies or is killed or deserts during this invasion. Do you think if there was a time for Duroc to lose faith in the greatness of Napoleon, it was here? Do you think he ever doubted his emperor?
Oh yes. In fact, I think I saw the signs just before the beginning of the Russian campaign. Now, to give it a bit of context, between 1810 and 1811, Napoleon was basically bullying Caulaincourt, who had just returned from Russia,
Right.
because Caulaincourt would refuse to, admit that Tsar Alexander was keen on engaging in another war with France. So
Hmm.
Caulaincourt, for multiple times, protests that he will either quit or stop talking about Russia altogether. And it's here Duroc, constantly intervenes on behalf of them to, save their relationship from falling apart. For instance, when Colin Core complained to Duroc that he must retire because everything has become so tiresome,
Hmm.
Duroc tells him, less than ever is this the moment to take such a step. You'll lose your friends and ruin yourself. Have
Hmm.
patience, and things will straighten out. Just now the Emperor's annoyed with you, but he holds you in his team. He's even fond of you. It's absurd of you to take the Russian business so much to heart. Since you cannot hope to change the Emperor's plans, why irritate him? And
Right.
yeah, Duroc basically helps, Colin Core stay mentally stable amidst all the drama between Russia and France.
Right.
But Duroc also showed signs of becoming unstable himself on the eve of his departure. So he was about to have his last-minute conversation with Bourrienne, and then a courier from Napoleon interrupted their conversation. So after the courier was gone in 5 minutes, Duroc suddenly stamped violently on the floor, and he was shrieking, almost as if cursing Napoleon. That never leaves me a moment's rest.
Hmm.
So he could sense something was going wrong in this expedition. But as I have told you, as a key difference that separated his personality from Caulaincourt, he never was intent on stopping what the emperor was doing.
So yeah, obviously that goes terribly wrong. And then in 1813, we have the War of German Liberation,
Mm-hmm.
and initially Napoleon does well. He wins battles at Lutzen and Bautzen, and the victorious Grand Army is after Bautzen. They're making a slow pursuit of Allied forces who are
Mm-hmm.
retreating. And at the town of Reichenbach, can you tell me what happened there?
Oh, yes. So on the 22nd, Napoleon, now after the Battle of Bautzen, tries to lead Rainier's 7th Corps to cross the Markersdorf River to, pin down the Russian encampment on the other side of the river.
Mm-hmm.
And before leaving, Napoleon tells Duroc that fortune is resolved to have one of us today. And then the battle recommenced. It starts out as a small sortie and then becomes a full-blown exchange of cannonade, where the Russian commander, the Duke Eugen of Württemberg, manages to hold out for a few more hours. And it was like a fire-breathing mountain was behind Rheinbach, according to a Saxon general Odeleben, who was still serving under Napoleon.
Mm-hmm.
And then at 4:30 p.m., when the enemy occupied a second height between Rheinbach and Markersdorf, Napoleon, trotted around the area covered with dead and wounded already, and he himself miraculously dodges several bullets that fell close to him. But during that time, General Bruyères has both of his legs shot off, who shortly dies of wounds. And
Mm-hmm.
then it becomes 7 p.m. when Napoleon, comes to greet Mortier, Caulaincourt, Duroc, and Kurgener towards a hill overlooking an area called Niedermarkersdorf, where the cannonade was still being heard.
Right.
Then suddenly, a shell hits Kurgener, and then amidst this dust storm that causes everyone to be virtually blind, another shell mortally wounds Duroc, and a page soon comes to Napoleon and whispers to him that Duroc had been wounded.
Yeah, and I hear it was quite a violent cannon shot. It ricocheted off a tree, hit Duroc in the stomach, ripping
Mm-hmm.
open his belly and spilling his intestines all over his uniform, saddle, and horse. And
Yeah, so he was completely disemboweled and was carried to a cottage in Markersdorf.
Mm.
And Napoleon was seen pleading to Dr. Larry, my dear Larry, I know well that my wound is and so Napoleon was pleading to Larry to save him.
Right.
But Duroc was just like helplessly saying, "My dear Larry, I know well that my wound is far beyond the reach of your art." And according to accounts that have been dramatized in Napoleon's bulletin, Duroc managed to hold on for a few more hours,
Hmm.
and the emperor went to him and evinced the deepest feelings in a most touching despair that moved everyone around. And Secretary Medieval could see Napoleon remaining there more than a quarter of an hour, grasping Duroc's right hand with his own hand resting upon him.
Hmm.
But Duroc kept, pushing him away, begging him to go away from so miserable a sight. And
Hmm.
he pleaded Larry to give him an extra opium to put him to sleep.
Hmm.
And Napoleon, according to what he said in the bulletin, which Bourrienne claims to be fictitious, Duroc, there is another world, he said, where we shall meet again. And Duroc replied, I have nothing to reproach myself with.
Hmm.
Afterwards, Napoleon was leaning on Soult and Caulaincourt shoulder by shoulder, withdrew himself to his tent, confined himself there, and spent the whole night weeping. He
Hmm.
wrote to Marie Louise the next morning when Duroc, was no longer alive. Fancy my grief. You know how fond I was of the Duke of Friaul. He was a friend of 20 years' standing. Never did I have any occasion to complain of him, for he was never anything but a comfort to me. He's an irreparable loss, the greatest I could suffer in the army. It was a very ominous day too, because it was also the anniversary of the Battle of Essling, when
Hmm.
Napoleon's another confidant,
Martial law.
had
Yeah.
died. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's interesting, that story, that Napoleon retired to his tent and wept. People sometimes say Napoleon's like this unfeeling tyrant who has no care for his soldiers. And I know he cried at least on two occasions before, with Marshal Lannes and
Mhm.
General Gudin's death in
Right.
Russia. So I think Napoleon unfairly gets categorized as an unfeeling person.
Mhm. Maybe
Um,
like he was able to compartmentalize his feelings as well.
right.
One side of his mind is the sadness for his long-term friends, but he's also constantly thinking about the battles ahead of him. That's,
Correct.
I think, how I like to understand these contested claims regarding Napoleon's wars regarding the people around him.
Yeah, that's a good point for sure. I know Napoleon bought the farm where Duroc died and erected a monument to his memory. But
Yes.
here's the interesting part. Napoleon just witnessed Duroc's violent death, and not long afterwards asked for an armistice where he seemingly had the Allies up against the wall. They were on the run, they lost a couple battles, and a 9-week truce was agreed to by the Allies, who eventually had time to regroup and defeat Napoleon. Do you think Duroc's death motivated this olive branch by Napoleon?
I think it was, one of the factors that could have expedited Napoleon's decision, because as we can remember, Bessières had died less than a month before
Hmm.
Duroc's death,
Yep.
and it could have the whole situation could have pointed out to Napoleon that his luck could have been fading, that his fortune was eclipsing. But
Right.
that's the interpretation by the primary eyewitnesses who was able to recount both scenes. But on the other hand, I think in the longer context, the um, the interest was rather mutual. The need for this truth,
Hmm.
because for Napoleon, it was becoming evident that he could not gain a decisive advantage on the Upper Elbe, because
Hmm.
the lack of cavalry was incurring constant harassment of his
Yep.
flanks by the Cossacks, those
Yep.
menace, and the shortage of forage was becoming more extreme. And it was no exception in Saxony, his only ally in the Confederation of the Rhine. But the other regions were, no less worse because Metternich also thought that a truce was needed to, bolster the remaining armies the coalition had, while, while kind of fighting for time to settle for, something that could be of, mutual interest.
Mm-hmm.
So it was Metternich who actually made the first move, and Napoleon, you know, agreed to the decision. But
Right.
at the end, it ended really badly after the famous hat incident and Napoleon's insistence that he could not forsake any of his territorial gains, especially the Confederation of the Rhine and the Duchy of Warsaw.
Right. Yeah, it's just interesting. Like you pointed out, he lost Marshal Bessier in 1813, then Duroc, and then he abdicates in 1814, and again in 1815. So it's just he's starting to lose a lot of his close confidants towards the end there, and it's just unfortunate.
Right.
In 1847, Duroc's remains are moved to Les Invalides, where he's interred near Napoleon. What do you think Duroc's legacy is?
I think personally, being one of the few Napoleon could call a friend, it kind of pointed to the personal appeal of Napoleon that's becoming, quite underrated these days, because Duroc followed Napoleon everywhere without
Mhm.
asking for, any reward in return.
Mhm.
Um, so he's, I think, one of the counter proofs to the criticism of Napoleon that he was an inhumane tyrant. Rather, I think his existence was a proof that Napoleon certainly had an indisputable personal appeal to those around him. At least during the early phase of his life. And another is that I think he also exemplified the pitfall common to many of Napoleon's subordinates, being loyal to the point of lacking criticism of their commanders'
Right.
faults. Right.
Right. Those are two good points right there. And Napoleon was surrounded by intelligent men who did have good judgment. Marshal Soult was intelligent. Caulaincourt, obviously. Berthier, very intelligent, and not until the very end did they kind of question, where is this going? Where is this empire headed? And I think Duroc probably would have stayed by his side till the very end. I think he was that loyal.
Yep, I'm confident about that. Pretty
Yeah,
much.
yeah. Well, thank you, Irene. That was fantastic overview. I just really impressive guy, Duroc, and yeah, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, by the way, for inviting me once again.
Yeah, my pleasure.